Infinite Bus Recursion, a Salvia 40X trip report by Salt on Arrowhead.
I had been considering trying a salvia extract for a while before this, after around 10 positive experiences with plain leaf. After a friend had offered to sell me a 40X extract for a reasonable price, I made up my mind and decided I would see what all the fuss was about. I had read extract reports online and couldn't really imagine salvia being as strong as some of the things that I was reading about after having such mild experiences with plain leaf. It's worth noting at this point I had only smoked salvia with a normal lighter, and decided to buy a jet lighter for the extract after reading online that it was recommended. The day finally comes when I decide to try it out, so I make my way to my basement and get prepared. I turn off all the lights, grab the shitty apple pipe that I had made with a pencil and a Granny Smith, and put on some duster. I decided to just start off with a pinch, and go for a second hit if needed. I felt a little nervous, but shook it off and lit up. I began my inhale. The smoke was harsh and started to burn my lungs. I pulled away before the bowl was finished, in fear of coughing it all out. I estimate I only made it through about 3/4 of the bowl. I quickly put everything down, and laid on the couch and covered myself in a blanket. I had planned to count to 20 in my head, but in my nervousness I had forgotten. I realized this somewhere around the 10-second mark, and decided to estimate it. I reached what I assumed to be 20 seconds, and exhaled. For a brief moment or two I don't feel much, and begin to think about a second hit. As I'm getting up, however, I feel what is best described as an electric sensation jolt through my body. I start to look around, but realize no matter how hard I try, I can't. Every time I looked to the right, I felt my head turn and my vision would start to shift, but it would end up in the original spot. After this, something happened, but it gets hazy, and for the life of me I cannot remember exactly what happened besides an incredibly vague sensation of something significant occurring. The next thing I remember is being suddenly transported to a third-person view of two-dimensional cartoon characters inside a school bus. The characters themselves were incredibly vague except for their ears, which resembled those of a rabbit, despite their otherwise human form. Now, what I'm about to try to explain is going to sound completely idiotic and incoherent, but bear with me. Anyway, something suddenly happened that caused my view to start zooming in on one of the cartoon characters' ears, which would reveal it to be another bus filled with cartoon characters, creating a fractal. Everyone else on the bus would realize this and attempt to stop the zooming, but to no use. Every time a zoom would happen, the fractal would get more intense as everything got more impossibly small. After a while, I started to try myself to stop it, as every time the fractal reiterated I felt a strange sensation that I cannot describe in words, but the closest thing I could compare it to is raw pain. With every new bus, the pain grew, and as everything started to become infinitely small, I began to desperately try to escape the hallucination. I was trying to will myself back to reality, as I was aware that I belonged somewhere other than here, even though I wasn't quite sure where. Also, with each iteration, the cartoon people would shout something along the lines of M-stick. I know it was something more than that, but that's the only part I remembered. Eventually, I managed to succeed and forcibly willed myself back into reality. The first thing I remember after returning is laughing hysterically like a madman and suddenly sitting up. I had been thinking of something that I remember being pretty funny, but I can't place exactly what it was. I then tried to look left and found, to my dismay, I was experiencing the same exact vision shift problem from the beginning of the trip. I then got scared and wondered if I had even reached the peak yet, and hid under my blanket and hoped it would end soon. I decided to check the time after about a minute of that, and discovered that only 7 minutes had passed from my inhale. I found this incredibly odd, as from my perception the whole bus ordeal had lasted around 20 minutes. I got up and started freaking out, and promised myself I would never touch salvia again, and started to eat my makeshift apple pipe in an attempt to ensure that. After the pipe was thoroughly destroyed, I was still freaking out a little bit and unsure of what to do with myself. It was here when I noticed I still had a Duster playlist playing in the background, and it had been completely tuned out throughout the entire trip until just now. I was still having trouble moving my vision, but it was now possible, unlike before. I still felt very much off, but was comforted I was back in sweet reality instead of Salvia land. I decided I would take a shower to calm my nerves and went into the bathroom and sat down on the shower floor as the water pelted me. I took about a 10-minute shower, and despite my mind racing the entire time, I felt a little better. However, for the next hour or so on the come down, I felt depressed, and every time I tried to distract myself with one of my hobbies, it felt meaningless, and I would move on to the next one. I couldn't stop thinking about what I had just experienced, and nothing seemed worth it to me anymore. After about an hour and a half since the inhale, I began to feel much better and like my normal self again. I resolved that I would never do a salvia extract again. It was eye-opening and interesting, but not enjoyable in the slightest. I'm not upset that I tried it, though, and I think salvia extracts are a try once and never again kind of thing, rather than a never try this kind of thing like Datura or DPH. I would also like to point out that based off what I've read and the fact that I had such a small dose, I think my experience was more comparable to a 10 to 20x extract experience. The end. So, I love a good salvia report, and I love any trip report that mentions fractals. Fractals are very interesting, and it's definitely a recurring theme in salvia trips, especially the conveyor belts with all possible iterations of your own reality and the like. A fractal is an infinitely recurring pattern. So, if a computer were able to generate a real fractal, it would generate the entire universe, which is pretty neat. I've personally smoked salvia extract a number of times, and it sure is freaky. The 2 times that were really significant, I've never broken through, but I weird stuff, definitely. Both times it was in the same place. Okay. Both times it was in the same place, on my friend's couch, and both times I did about a full bowl of 20x with a water bong. And the first time I did this, it was me and my friend on the couch with his dog in between us. And I hit the thing, held it in, and then as soon as I exhaled, the edges of my vision started becoming like more definite, like very colorful and with like outlines of shapes. And then the shapes started becoming animate. I started seeing little silhouette people on the edges of my vision, like running around and laughing and stuff. And it started creeping into the front of my vision. And then at one point I looked over to my left at my friend's dog, and it freaked me out. I wouldn't recommend looking at a dog on salvia. Anyway, this weird effect where everything was becoming animate, eventually it reached the point where it was affecting everything I could see, and then everything started getting sucked into the floor behind the coffee table. That's what it felt like, was all the walls and everything in the room were being stretched downward into a bottomless pit right behind the coffee table. But I can't really tell you what it looked like, but that's what it felt like. And I felt myself being sucked in, and I knew that if I did just a little bit more, I would be sucked in. And definitely, this time in particular was definitely the scariest time I ever did Salvia. It was pure terror in 15 seconds flat. With Salvia, there's this, for me at least, there's an inherent dysphoric quality that comes along with it. Like how on mushrooms you get euphoria, the self-sustaining euphoric feeling. With Salvia, it's just like that, but it's dysphoria. It's not like, oh, I'm having a bad trip, kind of like bad acid trip anxiety. It's just like straight up, you just get hit with dysphoria. You hardly have a choice. You can't really work around it. You have to kind of just deal with it, in my experience, which is not a lot. The only other time that was really significant when I did Salvia extract, I started off on the same couch, hit the same bong the same way, and then I immediately experienced my first real Salvia gravity. I was pulled onto the floor, like it felt like I was pulled onto the floor, diagonally and downwards, off the couch. I felt like I was glued to the floor, like it was an elastic band that was stretched out while I was on the couch, and then the only way to release the tension was to sit on the floor. So that's what I did. I sat on the floor, and then I was kind of just staring in front of me, and I've never been zippered, but I got a zipper. It was this line of interference or something. It was like this vertical line cutting across my whole field of vision, going sort of below me or through me and out in front of me on the floor, and then up to the wall, and then around me, and then behind me, and then through me once again. And it was like, I mean, it's very hard to describe Salvia visual. It was like this line was a seam, and stuff was coming out of it, seeping through, like a section of reality was being overstuffed with information. And there was a strange physical sensation that went along with the sensation of this line thing. It's very hard to describe. Hi. Be careful with Salvia unless you want to get really freaked out. And honestly, don't smoke it. That's my advice. Don't smoke Salvia. Get you some fresh leaves and chew.
Rhythm administration.